The screech of metal tearing through metal filled the night air. And Patricia Monroe didn't even have time to scream before her sedan flipped over the guardrail and tumbled down the embankment. Glass shattered around her, the airbag deployed with violent force, and then everything went dark except for the acrid smell of smoke and the distant sound of someone shouting. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, pulling her through the destroyed driver's side window. She could barely keep her eyes open, could barely register the sharp pain radiating through her left arm and ribs. Everything felt muffled and strange, like she was underwater. The man pulling her free had dark hair and broad shoulders, and his voice was urgent as he spoke to her, though she couldn't make out the words. He lifted her easily, carrying her away from the wreckage just as flames began licking up from under the crumpled hood. "Stay with me," he commanded, his voice cutting through the fog in her mind. "Don't close your eyes. Look at me." She tried to focus on his face, but darkness pulled at her consciousness like a riptide. The last thing she remembered was the sound of sirens in the distance and the feeling of being held against someone's chest, his heart pounding beneath her ear. When Patricia woke, soft morning light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, and she found herself in the largest, most luxurious bedroom she had ever seen. The bed beneath her felt like clouds. The sheets were softer than anything she owned, and her left arm was in a cast while her ribs were wrapped in bandages, beneath an expensive-looking silk pajama set that definitely wasn't hers. For several long moments, she just stared at the vaulted ceiling trying to piece together what had happened, the car accident, the man who pulled her out, the fire. She sat up slowly, wincing at the pain that shot through her side. The room around her looked like something from an architectural magazine, all clean lines and tasteful neutrals with touches of deep blue and gold. Original artwork hung on the walls. Through the windows, she could see manicured gardens stretching out toward what looked like a private lake. Where the hell was she? The door opened quietly, and a woman in her 50s wearing professional attire stepped inside. "Oh, you're awake. How are you feeling, dear?" Confused, Patricia admitted, her voice hoarse. "Where am I? What happened? You were in a terrible accident 3 days ago. Mr. Zeller brought you here. The doctors have been monitoring you closely. You had a concussion, 3 broken ribs and a fractured arm, but you're healing well." The woman moved to the bedside and poured water from a crystal pitcher into a glass. "I'm Margaret, the house manager. Mr. Zeller asked to be notified immediately when you woke. He's been quite worried." "Mr. Zeller? I don't understand. Why am I in someone's house instead of a hospital?" Margaret smiled gently. "Mr. Zeller felt you would recover better here where you could have private care." The doctors agreed, given the circumstances. "He's covered all your medical expenses, of course." Patricia's mind reeled. 3 days. She'd been unconscious for 3 days. And who was this Mr. Zeller who apparently decided to bring a stranger into his home? "I need to call my sister," Patricia said suddenly, panic rising in her chest. "And my job. God, I was supposed to work, already taken care of," Margaret assured her. "Your sister Veronica has been calling every day for updates. Your phone was damaged in the accident, but Mr. Zeller made sure she knew you were safe. As for your job at the art gallery, they're aware of the situation and sending their best wishes." Before Patricia could process all of this, the door opened again, and a man walked in who made her breath catch in her throat. He was the one from the accident. She was certain of it, even though she'd only seen him through a haze of pain and shock. He stood at least 6 feet tall, with dark hair styled perfectly, sharp cheekbones, and intense gray eyes that immediately fixed on her face. He wore dark slacks and a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing muscular forearms. "You're awake," he said, and his voice was the same commanding tone she remembered. He crossed the room in 3 long strides. "How do you feel?" "Like I was in a car accident," Patricia said, still trying to understand what was happening. "Are you Mr. Zeller, Pierce Zeller?" He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I'm glad you're okay. You gave me quite a scare. You pulled me out of my car." "Just before it caught fire completely," Pierce confirmed. "You were unconscious. I called the ambulance, but I wanted to make sure you had the best care possible, so I brought you here once you were stabilized." Patricia shook her head slowly, immediately regretting the movement as dizziness washed over her. "I don't understand. Why would you do that for a complete stranger?" Something flickered in Pierce's eyes, an emotion she couldn't quite read. "I'm not in the habit of leaving people to fend for themselves when they are hurt. You needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. But this is crazy. Your home, private doctors covering my expenses. I can't accept all of this. I don't even know you." "You're in no condition to be anywhere else right now," Pierce said firmly. "Your apartment is a 3rd-floor walk-up with no elevator, according to your address. Your sister lives 2 states away. You would have been discharged from the hospital already, probably yesterday, and left to manage on your own with 3 broken ribs and a concussion. That's unacceptable." "How do you know where I live?" Patricia asked, feeling both grateful and slightly unnerved. "Your driver's license." "Margaret looked up your contact information to reach your sister." That made sense, but something about this entire situation felt surreal. "Mr. Zeller, Pierce." "Pierce," she corrected. "I appreciate what you did, really, but I can't stay here. This is too much." He studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes intense. "Where exactly do you think you're going to go? You can barely sit up without wincing. You can't drive, can't work, and you shouldn't be alone. Stay until you're healed enough to manage on your own. Consider it my responsibility since I was there when the accident happened." "That doesn't make it your responsibility." "Maybe not," Pierce acknowledged, "but I'm making it my responsibility anyway. You're staying." The way he said it with such absolute certainty should have irritated her. Instead, Patricia found herself oddly reassured by his confidence. She was in no shape to argue, and truthfully, the thought of climbing 3 flights of stairs to her tiny apartment made her want to cry. "Okay," she said quietly, "but just until I can manage on my own. And I'm paying you back for the medical bills." Pierce's mouth quirked slightly, almost a smile. "We'll discuss that when you're feeling better. For now, you should rest. The doctor will be by this afternoon to check on you. Margaret will bring you lunch, and anything you need, just ask. This is your space for as long as you need it." He stood to leave, and Patricia found herself not wanting him to go. "Pierce," he turned back, eyebrows raised, "thank you for saving my life." His expression softened. "Get some rest, Patricia." Over the next few days, Patricia began to grasp just how surreal her situation truly was. Pierce Zeller wasn't just wealthy. He was a billionaire, the founder and CEO of Zeller Industries, one of the largest renewable energy companies in the world. She'd learned this from Margaret, who seemed happy to talk while helping Patricia move around the enormous mansion. The house itself was stunning. A sprawling modern estate with 12 bedrooms, an indoor pool, a home theater, a gym, and more amenities than Patricia could count. But despite its size, it felt oddly intimate, perhaps because Pierce seemed to be around often, checking on her recovery. He'd bring her breakfast himself some mornings, sitting at the small table in her room while she ate, asking her about her work at the art gallery and her life before the accident. Patricia found herself opening up to him in ways she didn't expect, telling him about her passion for art history, her dreams of curating her own exhibition someday, and how she'd been saving for years to maybe open a small gallery of her own. "Why haven't you?" Pierce asked one morning, setting down his coffee cup. They'd fallen into an easy routine over the past week. He'd bring breakfast, they'd talk, and Patricia found herself looking forward to these conversations more than she wanted to admit. "Money, mostly," Patricia said honestly. "And fear, I guess. It's a big risk. What if I fail? What if you succeed?" Pierce countered. "You're clearly passionate about it. That counts for more than people realize." "Is that how you built your company?" Patricia asked. "Passion." "Passion and stubbornness," Pierce said, and this time he did smile, a real one that transformed his whole face. "I don't give up easily." "I've noticed," Patricia said dryly, thinking about how he dismissed every attempt she'd made to discuss leaving or repaying him. Pierce's smile widened. "You're getting your strength back. You've been arguing with me more. Because you're incredibly stubborn. Takes one to know one." Patricia threw a balled-up napkin at him, which he caught easily, and the sound of his laughter surprised her. She realized she liked making him laugh, liked breaking through that serious, intense exterior. By the second week, Patricia was able to walk around the house on her own, though her ribs still protested any sudden movements. Pierce had insisted she use the library during the day, a massive room filled with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, comfortable seating, and windows overlooking the gardens. She'd brought her laptop there one afternoon, planning to catch up on emails and work correspondence, when Pierce found her curled up in an oversized leather chair, absorbed in research about an upcoming exhibition. "You're supposed to be resting," he said from the doorway. Patricia looked up, startled. "I've been resting for 2 weeks. I'm going crazy with nothing to do." Pierce walked into the library, his presence somehow making the large room feel smaller. "What are you working on?" "Just looking at upcoming shows. Trying to stay current with what's happening in the art world." She gestured to her laptop screen. "There's a retrospective opening in the city next month that I really wanted to see, but I'll probably miss it now." "Why will you miss it?" "Because I'll be recovered enough to leave by then," Patricia said. Though the thought of leaving this house, of not seeing Pierce every day, made her chest tight in a way that had nothing to do with her broken ribs. Pierce sat down in the chair across from her, his expression unreadable. "What if you didn't have to leave, Pierce? We've talked about this." "I know what we've talked about, but hear me out." He leaned forward, his gray eyes locked on hers. "You need more time to heal completely. Your ribs are still bothering you. I can see it when you move. Stay another month. 6 weeks. Let yourself fully recover. I can't impose on you like that." "It's not an imposition," Pierce said, and there was something in his voice that made Patricia's heart skip. "I like having you here." The admission hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Patricia felt her cheeks warm. "I like being here," she admitted quietly. "But that's exactly why I should probably leave soon. This isn't real life, Pierce. This is some kind of beautiful bubble that has to pop eventually." "What if it doesn't have to? What are you saying?" Pierce stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the gardens. "I'm saying that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since I pulled you from that wreck. I'm saying that having you here these past 2 weeks has been the best part of every day. I'm saying that I don't want you to leave, not because you need to recover, but because I want you to stay." Patricia's breath caught. "Pierce," he turned back to face her. "I know it's fast. I know it probably sounds crazy. But I didn't become successful by ignoring my instincts, and every instinct I have is telling me that you're important, that this is important." "You barely know me," Patricia whispered, even as her heart raced. "Then let me know you better. Stay. Not as a patient or a guest, but as someone I'm pursuing, someone I want to get to know in every possible way." He moved back toward her chair, crouching down so they were at eye level. Tell me you don't feel this too. Patricia looked into his eyes and knew she couldn't lie. I feel it, she admitted. But Pierce, this situation, the power dynamic, you saved my life and took me into your home. What if I'm just confused about what I'm feeling, are you? Confused? His hand reached out, gently touching her uninjured arm. The contact sent electricity through her. No, she breathed. I don't think I am. Then stay, let's see where this goes. Against every logical thought in her head, Patricia nodded. Okay, but I need to contribute somehow. I can't just live here doing nothing. Pierce's expression brightened. What if you worked for me? Doing what? I've been thinking about starting a corporate art collection for Zeller Industries. Something that would be displayed at our headquarters and various offices. I need someone with expertise to curate it, someone who understands art and can make intelligent acquisition decisions. The position would come with a salary, full benefits, and you'd have a significant budget to work with. Patricia stared at him. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you an opportunity that happens to benefit both of us. You get to work in your field. I get an art collection curated by someone talented. It's good business. And the fact that you want to date me has nothing to do with it. I'd want to date you regardless of whether you took the job, Pierce said honestly. But I know you need to feel independent, that you're uncomfortable with the idea of just accepting my help. This gives you autonomy and purpose. Take the job or don't, but either way, I'd like to take you to dinner once you're feeling up to it. Patricia couldn't help but laugh, even though it hurt her ribs. You're impossible. Is that a yes, to dinner or the job? Both. Patricia looked at him, this intense, successful, impossibly handsome man who had literally pulled her from a burning car and apparently decided she was worth pursuing. It was insane. It was too fast. It went against everything logical. Yes, she said. To both. Pierce's smile was brilliant. Good. Then let's start planning this art collection. And Patricia, yes, I'm very glad you crashed your car in front of me. That's a terrible thing to say, Patricia said, but she was smiling too. Their first official date happened 2 weeks later, when Patricia's ribs had healed enough that she could wear a proper dress without discomfort. Pierce took her to an exclusive restaurant in the city, the kind of place where you needed reservations months in advance, and every dish was a work of art. Patricia wore a deep blue dress that Margaret had mysteriously produced, fitted perfectly to her measurements, and when she came down the main staircase of the mansion, the look on Pierce's face made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. You're stunning, he said simply, offering his arm. The restaurant was everything she expected, elegant and refined, but what surprised Patricia was how comfortable she felt. Pierce was attentive without being overbearing, asking her opinions on the food and wine, telling her stories about his early days building his company, the failures and risks that had eventually led to success. I mortgaged everything I had to secure funding for the first major contract, Pierce told her over dessert. My apartment, my car, everything. My family thought I was insane. If it had fallen through, I would have been completely bankrupt. But you believed in yourself enough to take that risk, Patricia said. I believed in the technology, and I believed I could make it work. But yes, there was a moment of absolute terror when I signed those papers. He reached across the table, taking her hand. Sometimes the biggest risks lead to the best rewards. Are you talking about your company or about us? Patricia asked softly. Both. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I know this is unconventional, the way we met, how fast this is moving, but I meant what I said before. I've never felt this certain about something, about someone. I've never done anything like this, Patricia admitted. I'm usually so careful, so planned out. My whole life has been about making safe choices, but being with you doesn't feel reckless. It feels right. Pierce lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. It is right. On the drive back to the mansion, Patricia found herself studying Pierce's profile in the dim light of the car. He was handsome, certainly, but it was more than that. There was something about his presence, his confidence, the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the world who mattered. It should have been overwhelming, but instead it felt grounding, like she'd found something she didn't even know she was looking for. "What are you thinking?" Pierce asked, glancing at her. "That I'm glad I survived that accident," Patricia said. "Not just because I'm alive, but because it led me to you." Pierce pulled the car over suddenly, parking along a quiet overlook that showed the city lights twinkling below. He turned to face her, one hand cupping her cheek. "Can I kiss you?" Patricia's answer was to lean in, closing the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, mindful of her still healing injuries, but it quickly deepened, weeks of tension and growing feelings pouring into the contact. Pierce's hand slid into her hair and Patricia gripped his shirt, pulling him closer despite the twinge in her ribs. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Pierce rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I need you to know that." "I'm falling in love with you too," Patricia whispered back. "It terrifies me and thrills me at the same time." "Good," Pierce said, kissing her again, "because I'm not letting you go." The next few months were like living in a dream. Patricia threw herself into curating the art collection for Zeller Industries, traveling to galleries and auctions, consulting with artists, and slowly building something she was genuinely proud of. Pierce gave her complete creative freedom, trusting her judgment and expertise, and seeing her selections displayed in the gleaming headquarters of his company filled her with a sense of accomplishment she'd never experienced before. But more than the work, it was the relationship that transformed her life. Pierce was unlike anyone she'd ever dated. He was driven and demanding in his business life, but with her, he was attentive and thoughtful, always making sure she felt valued and heard. He remembered small details she mentioned in passing, surprising her with things she'd expressed interest in. When she mentioned loving a particular artist, he arranged a private studio visit. When she talked about missing her sister, he flew Veronica out for a long weekend, putting her up in one of the mansion's guest rooms. "You're spoiling me," Patricia told him one evening as they sat by the indoor pool, her legs dangling in the warm water while Pierce swam lazy laps. "I'm treating you the way you deserve to be treated," Pierce corrected, swimming over to stand between her legs. Water droplets clung to his shoulders and chest, and Patricia couldn't resist running her hands over his skin. "Besides, seeing you happy makes me happy." "I am happy," Patricia said honestly. "Happier than I've ever been." Pierce's hand settled on her thighs. "Move in with me officially." "I already live here," Patricia pointed out with a laugh. "You live in the guest room. I want you in my room, in my bed, in every part of my life completely." His gray eyes were serious. "I love you, Patricia. I want to wake up next to you every morning." Patricia's heart swelled. They'd been saying "I love you" for weeks now, but this felt different, bigger. "I love you too. And yes, I'll move into your room." "Our room," Pierce corrected, lifting himself out of the pool with easy strength and pulling her into his arms, mindful of her now healed ribs. "Everything I have is yours." That night, Patricia moved her belongings from the guest room into Pierce's master suite, a massive space with a fireplace, sitting area, and balcony overlooking the lake. Climbing into Pierce's bed, being held in his arms as they fell asleep together, felt like coming home in a way Patricia had never experienced. She traced patterns on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, and marveled at how completely her life had changed in just a few months. "What are you thinking?" Pierce murmured, his fingers running through her hair. "That you saved me in more ways than one," Patricia said softly. "Before the accident, I was just going through the motions. Working a job I liked but didn't love, living in a tiny apartment, too scared to take any real risks. And then you pulled me from that wreck and everything changed." "You changed your own life," Pierce said firmly. "I just provided the opportunity. Everything you've accomplished with the art collection, that's all you. Your talent, your vision, with your support." "Always with my support," Pierce agreed, tilting her chin up to kiss her. "For as long as you'll have me." "That might be a very long time," Patricia warned. "Good. Forever sounds about right to me." 6 months after the accident, Pierce took Patricia back to the spot where he'd pulled her from the wreck. The guardrail had been repaired, the scorch marks on the embankment had faded, and there was nothing to indicate what had happened there except Patricia's memories. "Why did we come here?" she asked, holding Pierce's hand as they stood by the side of the road. "Because this is where everything started," Pierce said. "This is where I found the love of my life trapped in a burning car and knew I'd do whatever it took to save her." Patricia turned to him, seeing the emotion in his face. "Pierce," he dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Patricia Monroe, you are brilliant, passionate, talented, and the strongest person I've ever met. You've made my life fuller and better in every possible way. I told you before that I don't let go of what's important to me, and you are the most important thing in my world. Will you marry me?" Patricia's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she gasped. "Yes, absolutely yes." The ring was beautiful, a stunning sapphire surrounded by diamonds, and as Pierce slid it onto her finger, Patricia couldn't help but laugh through her tears. "You really won't let me go, will you?" "Never," Pierce promised, standing and pulling her into his arms. "You're mine, and I'm yours, from this moment until forever." The wedding took place 8 months later in the gardens of the mansion, a beautiful autumn ceremony with gold and crimson leaves creating a natural canopy. Veronica stood as Patricia's maid of honor, crying happy tears throughout the entire event, while Pierce's best friend from college served as his best man. The guest list was relatively small, just close friends and family, exactly as Patricia and Pierce wanted it. As Patricia walked down the aisle toward Pierce, wearing a dress that made her feel like a princess, she thought about the incredible journey that had led to this moment. A car accident that should have killed her had instead given her everything she never knew she needed. The man waiting for her at the altar had saved her life in every sense of the word, and now she was promising to spend the rest of her life loving him. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with personal vows that left hardly a dry eye in attendance. When Pierce promised to love her, protect her, and support her dreams for the rest of his life, Patricia believed him with every fiber of her being. And when she promised the same to him, she meant every word with her whole heart. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant declared. "You may kiss your bride." Pierce pulled Patricia into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and love they shared, and the guests erupted in applause. As they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, Patricia caught sight of their reflection in one of the decorative mirrors set up in the garden. They looked radiant, complete, like two pieces of a puzzle that had finally found each other. The reception was held in an elegant tent set up on the lawn, with dinner, dancing, and speeches that made everyone laugh and cry. Veronica gave a touching speech about how worried she'd been when she first heard about the accident, and how grateful she was that Pierce had been there to save her sister in more ways than one. "I knew the moment I met Pierce that he was different," Veronica said, raising her glass. "The way he looked at Patricia, the way he talked about her, I'd never seen my sister inspire that kind of devotion before. And Patricia, you absolutely glow around him. You two are proof that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best things. To Pierce and Patricia. To Pierce and Patricia. Everyone echoed. Later, as they danced under the string lights, Pierce held Patricia close, swaying to a slow song. Happy, he murmured against her ear. Incredibly, Patricia answered. This is the best day of my life. Just wait until tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days to come, Pierce said. I plan to make every single one better than the last. That's a big promise. I've never broken a promise to you yet. Patricia pulled back to look at him, this man who had become her entire world. I love you so much. I love you too, Pierce said, kissing her softly. My wife. My husband, Patricia replied, and the words felt perfect on her lips. A year later, Patricia stood in the nursery of the mansion, painting soft clouds on the pale blue walls while Pierce assembled a crib with intense concentration. Her hand rested on her rounded belly, feeling the baby kick. How's it going over there? She asked, amused by the pile of instructions and hardware surrounding her husband. This crib has more parts than some of the renewable energy systems we install, Pierce grumbled, but he was smiling. But I'll figure it out. I'm not having my son sleep in a crib I didn't build myself. Our son is still months away from sleeping anywhere, Patricia reminded him. You have time. Pierce looked up at her, and the expression on his face was pure love. I can't wait to meet him. To meet her if we're wrong about the gender, I just can't wait. Patricia set down her paintbrush and walked over to him, carefully lowering herself to sit beside him on the floor. Do you ever think about that night? The accident? All the time, Pierce admitted. I think about what would have happened if I'd left work 5 minutes earlier or later, if I'd taken a different route home. The odds of me being in exactly that spot at exactly that moment were astronomical. Fate, Patricia suggested. Maybe. Or maybe just incredible luck. Either way, I'm grateful. He put his hand over hers on her belly, feeling their baby kick. For all of this. For you, for our child, for the life we're building together. Me too, Patricia said softly. You know, I was so scared at first. Everything happened so fast and it felt overwhelming. But you were right to hold on, to not let me run away out of fear. I told you, Pierce said, leaning in to kiss her. I don't let go of what's important, and you're the most important thing in my world. You and this little one. The baby kicked again, as if in agreement, and they both laughed. When their son was born 3 months later, they named him Alexander Pierce Zeller, and he had his mother's eyes and his father's determination. Pierce was a devoted father from the first moment, taking paternity leave from the company and spending his days helping with feedings, diaper changes, and late-night soothing when Alexander decided sleep was optional. Patricia watched her husband cradle their tiny son, singing off-key lullabies, and fell in love with him all over again. This was the man who had pulled her from a burning car, who had refused to let her face recovery alone, who had seen her potential before she'd fully seen it herself. He'd given her everything, not just material wealth but love, support, and a family she'd always dreamed of having. What are you thinking? Pierce asked softly, noticing her watching them. That I'm the luckiest woman alive, Patricia said honestly. I'm the lucky one, Pierce countered. I was just driving home from a late meeting. I could have missed you completely, but I was there and I got to save you, and now look at us. A family. A perfect family, Patricia agreed. As Alexander grew from an infant to a toddler, the mansion filled with the sounds of laughter and running feet. Patricia had returned to her work curating the art collection, now expanded to include pieces displayed in Zeller Industries offices worldwide. She'd also begun consulting for other companies, building a reputation as one of the premier corporate art curators in the industry. Pierce couldn't have been prouder, showing anyone who would listen examples of her work and talking about her talent. On their third wedding anniversary, Pierce surprised Patricia with a trip to Paris, just the two of them while Veronica stayed with Alexander. They spent a week exploring museums, eating incredible food, and remembering what it felt like to be just a couple instead of parents, though they missed their son terribly and video called him every day. One evening, as they sat at a cafe near the Louvre watching the sunset, Pierce took Patricia's hand across the table. "You remember the first time we really talked?" he asked. "That morning when you woke up in the mansion and you were so determined to leave." "I remember you being impossibly stubborn about it," Patricia said with a smile. "I was terrified you'd insist on going and I'd lose my chance to know you," Pierce admitted. "From the moment I saw you in that wreck, something in me just knew. I knew you were going to be important to me." "You couldn't have known that. You hadn't even seen my face clearly." "Maybe not consciously, but something deeper knew. Call it instinct, intuition, fate, whatever. I just knew I couldn't let you go." He squeezed her hand. "Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Patricia corrected. "The best decision was proposing to me." "You're right," Pierce agreed, "although pulling you from the wreck comes in a close third." They laughed together, and Patricia marveled at how easy everything was with him, how natural. 3 years of marriage and she still got butterflies when he smiled at her, still felt that rush of love when he walked into a room. "Should we talk about giving Alexander a sibling?" Pierce asked casually, though his eyes were bright with hope. Patricia's smile widened. "I thought you'd never ask." Their daughter, Emma Grace Zeller, was born 2 years later, and she had her father's gray eyes and her mother's artistic temperament. With 2 children, the mansion truly became a home, filled with toys, art projects, and the constant happy chaos of family life. Pierce, despite running a multi-billion-dollar company, made family his priority. He coached Alexander's soccer team, attended every one of Emma's dance recitals, and never missed bedtime stories. Patricia balanced her thriving career with motherhood, often bringing the kids to gallery openings and teaching them about art from an early age. One Saturday afternoon, when Alexander was 7 and Emma was 3, the whole family took a trip into the city to see the opening of an exhibition Patricia had been particularly excited about. As they walked through the gallery, Alexander holding Pierce's hand and Emma perched on Patricia's hip, Patricia caught sight of their reflection in one of the gallery windows. They looked like the perfect family, happy and united, and she realized they really were. This was everything she'd ever wanted, even when she hadn't known she wanted it. "Mommy, I like this one," Emma announced, pointing at a colorful abstract painting. "Why do you like it?" Patricia asked, always encouraging her children to think about art. "It's happy," Emma said simply. "Like our house." Pierce and Patricia exchanged a look over the kids' heads, both smiling. "She's right," Pierce said. "It is happy, just like our house." On their 10th wedding anniversary, Pierce threw Patricia a surprise party at the mansion, inviting everyone important in their lives. The art world colleagues she'd made over the years, Pierce's business associates who had become friends, Veronica and her own growing family, and countless others who had become part of their lives. As Patricia stood in the elegant ballroom of their home, surrounded by people she loved, she thought back to that terrified woman waking up in a strange mansion 10 years earlier. That woman had been so certain she needed to leave, to maintain her independence, to not accept help from anyone. She'd been wrong. Accepting Pierce's help, letting him into her life, had been the best decision she'd ever made. Speech. Someone called out, and soon the whole room was chanting for Pierce and Patricia to say something. Pierce pulled Patricia close, one arm around her waist, and addressed the crowd. 10 years ago, I was driving home late from a meeting, and I witnessed a car accident that changed my life. I pulled a woman from a burning wreck, and in that moment, holding her in my arms, I knew my life would never be the same. I was right. He turned to look at Patricia, his eyes full of love. Patricia, you have made every single day of the last 10 years an adventure. You've given me a family, a home filled with love, and more happiness than I ever imagined possible. I told you once that I don't let go of what's important, and you are the most important thing in my life, along with our children. Here's to 10 more years and 10 after that, and forever beyond. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. I was so scared that first day, waking up in your home. Everything had changed so fast, and I didn't know how to handle it. But you were patient with me. You gave me space to find my footing while still holding on tight enough that I couldn't run away out of fear. You saw potential in me I didn't see in myself, and you've supported every dream I've had. You pulled me from that wreck, but more than that, you pulled me into a life more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. I love you, Pierce Zeller, today and always. They kissed to thunderous applause, and Alexander and Emma ran over to join them, wrapping their arms around their parents' legs. Pierce scooped Emma up while Patricia pulled Alexander close, and they stood there as a family, complete and happy. The party continued late into the night with dancing and laughter and joy. At one point, Patricia found herself standing on the terrace, looking out at the gardens where they'd been married, the lake reflecting the moonlight. Pierce came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything," Patricia said honestly. "The accident, waking up here, falling in love with you, our wedding, the kids, all of it. It's been quite a decade." "The best decade of my life," Pierce said firmly, "and it's only going to get better. You always say that, because it's always true." He turned her in his arms so they were facing each other. "I love you, Patricia. More now than I did 10 years ago, which I wouldn't have thought possible back then." "I love you too," Patricia whispered, kissing him softly. "Thank you for not letting me go." "Never," Pierce promised, the same promise he'd been making for 10 years. "You're mine and I'm yours forever." As they stood there under the stars, holding each other close, Patricia thought about the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. A random car accident, a stranger who became her savior, a recovery that turned into a romance, and a love that had built a family and a life more wonderful than any storybook. She'd been terrified that first day in the mansion, convinced she needed to leave and maintain her independence. But Pierce had seen what she couldn't see then. That accepting help wasn't weakness, that letting someone care for you didn't mean losing yourself, and that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places. He'd pulled her from a car wreck and into his life, and he'd never let go. And Patricia had never been more grateful for anything in her entire life. Years continued to pass in a blur of happiness. Alexander grew into a thoughtful teenager with his mother's love of art and his father's business acumen. Emma became a bright, creative preteen who declared she wanted to be a painter when she grew up. Pierce's company continued to thrive, leading innovations in renewable energy that were changing the world. And Patricia's career reached new heights, with her curating exhibitions for major museums alongside her corporate work. Through it all, their love remained the foundation of everything. They still had date nights every week, still stole kisses in the hallway, still made each other laugh at the dinner table. The passion that had sparked between them in those early days had never faded, maturing into something deeper and more profound. A love built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and genuine partnership. On their 15th anniversary, Pierce surprised Patricia with something unusual. He'd found the tow truck driver who had taken her wrecked car away all those years ago. The man had kept one item from the wreck, something he'd found tucked under the passenger seat that had somehow survived the fire and impact. It was Patricia's old journal, singed at the edges but mostly intact. She hadn't even remembered having it in the car that night. As she flipped through the pages, reading entries from before the accident, she saw a woman who had been lost, uncertain about her future, playing it safe. One entry, written just days before the accident, caught her attention. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm just going through the motions. I'm almost 30, working a job I like but don't love, living alone, too scared to take any real risks. When did I become so afraid of life? I wish something would happen to shake me out of this rut." Patricia showed the entry to Pierce, who read it thoughtfully. "You got your wish," he said softly, "though probably not in the way you expected." "Definitely not," Patricia agreed, "but I wouldn't change a thing. That accident was the worst thing that ever happened to me." "Me too," Pierce said, pulling her close. "Though I'd prefer you never be in danger again." "Deal," Patricia said, snuggling into his embrace. As their children graduated high school and headed off to college, Pierce and Patricia found themselves with more time alone together. They traveled extensively, visiting art capitals around the world, hiking in remote locations, and simply enjoying each other's company. The mansion, once filled with the noise of children, became a peaceful retreat where they could reconnect and remember why they'd fallen in love in the first place. Not that the love had ever been in question. Through every challenge, every stressful moment, every difficulty that life threw at them, Pierce and Patricia faced it together. They were partners in every sense of the word, supporting each other's dreams and picking each other up when things got hard. On their 20th anniversary, they decided to renew their vows in the same garden where they'd been married. Alexander and Emma stood up for them, now young adults with lives of their own. And as Patricia and Pierce recited vows that were even more meaningful than the ones they'd spoken 2 decades earlier, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. "20 years ago," Pierce said, his voice thick with emotion, "I promised to love you, protect you, and support your dreams. I've kept that promise and I'll continue keeping it for the rest of my life. You are my heart, Patricia, my home, my everything." 20 years ago, Patricia replied, tears streaming down her face, "I took the biggest risk of my life and married a man I'd known for less than a year. It seemed crazy then, but every day since has proved it was the sanest decision I've ever made. You saved my life, Pierce, in every way a person can be saved. I love you more than words can express." They kissed, surrounded by the people they loved, in the garden where they'd pledged their lives to each other, and it felt just as magical as it had 20 years earlier. That night, lying in bed together in the room they'd shared for 2 decades, Patricia traced her fingers over Pierce's chest, following paths she knew by heart. "You ever think about what your life would be like if you hadn't been on that road that night?" she asked softly. "Never," Pierce said immediately. "Because this is the only life I want. This is the only version of my story that matters. I found you, I fell in love with you, and I built a family with you. Nothing else could compare." "I used to be so scared of taking risks," Patricia mused. "And then I ended up taking the biggest risk of all by falling for you so fast, by trusting you, by building this life with you. It should have been terrifying." "Was it?" "Sometimes," Patricia admitted. "But mostly it felt right, like coming home." "That's how it felt for me too," Pierce said, kissing her forehead. "From the moment I held you after pulling you from that wreck, I felt like I'd found something I'd been searching for my entire life, even though I hadn't known I was searching." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, just as they had for 20 years, just as they would for however many years they had left together. As Patricia drifted off, she thought about that journal entry, about the woman who had wished for something to shake up her life. She'd gotten her wish in the most dramatic way possible, and it had led to more happiness than she'd ever dreamed possible. Pierce had pulled her from a car wreck all those years ago, but more than that, he'd pulled her into a life filled with love, adventure, purpose, and joy. He'd given her a family, a career she was passionate about, and a partnership that made every day brighter. And true to his word, he'd never let go. Years later, when their grandchildren asked how they'd met, Pierce and Patricia would tell the story of the car accident, the mansion, and the billionaire who had been too stubborn to let the woman he'd saved simply walk away. The grandchildren would listen with wide eyes, amazed at the romance of it all, and Patricia would always end the story the same way. "Your grandfather saved my life that night," she'd say, squeezing Pierce's hand. "And every day since, I've been grateful that he was exactly where he needed to be at exactly the right time. Some people might call it luck or coincidence, but I think it was meant to be. We were meant to find each other, meant to build this family, meant to have this beautiful life together." "Absolutely meant to be," Pierce would agree, looking at Patricia with the same love and intensity he'd had since that very first day. "And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." Their love story had begun with tragedy and trauma, with fire and fear and uncertainty. But it had blossomed into something beautiful, something lasting, something that proved that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes. Patricia had crashed her car, and Pierce had refused to let her face the aftermath alone. He'd brought her into his home, into his life, and into his heart, and she'd done the same for him. They'd built something extraordinary together, a love that would last for the rest of their lives and beyond, a legacy that would live on in their children and grandchildren. It was a love story for the ages, one that started with a simple act of heroism and grew into something neither of them could have predicted. Pierce Zeller had pulled Patricia Monroe from a burning wreck, brought her to his mansion, and absolutely refused to let her go. And Patricia, despite her initial resistance, despite her fear and uncertainty, had let him hold on. She'd let herself fall in love, let herself be loved, and in doing so, had found everything she'd ever wanted and so much more. Their story was proof that love could bloom in the most unexpected places, that sometimes the person who saves your life becomes the person you can't imagine living without, and that when you find something real, something true, something worth fighting for, you hold on tight and never let go. Pierce and Patricia Zeller had found that in each other, and they lived happily ever after in every sense of the phrase, their love growing stronger with each passing year, their partnership deepening, their family expanding, their happiness complete. It was the kind of love story people dream about, the kind that seems too perfect to be real, but for Pierce and Patricia, it was simply their life. Their beautiful, extraordinary, perfectly imperfect life together. And it all started the night he pulled her from a car wreck, brought her to his mansion, and made the decision that would change both their lives forever. He simply wouldn't let go.